Good day, everybody, and welcome to today's episode on my YouTube channel. And on my YouTube channel, that we normally talk about retirement topics in Johor Bahru or property investment topics in Johor Bahru, Malaysia. Now, today I'm going to talk about a topic which is three ways you can make money with improving relations between Singapore and Johor Bahru, right? Which is something which I guess I don't normally talk about, but I wanted to share something which I guess is a different perspective from what we normally, hear and say on this channel. So most of you are probably wondering, Ryan, we do know that Johor Bahru and Singapore things are getting better recently, right? So how can we benefit from it, right? Of course, property investment is one way, right? And of course, a lot of you are watching this channel because you are considering retiring, right, in Malaysia, or maybe spending a bit more time in Malaysia for whatever reason, right? So let me talk about three ways to make money, right? Let's talk about a different topic altogether, which is how to make money. So number one is the most obvious one, which is to manufacture in JB and sell in Singapore. Okay, I repeat, manufacture or produce this item in JB and then sell in Singapore. Now, what can we manufacture typically is the most basic thing. I think the first time I heard about it was a Singaporean, right? He actually import kueh, kueh, those curry puff, small, things that you buy at your HDB food court, right? At the drink store typically, right? All those kueh and other small stuff, right, that you eat for snacks and all that. He actually have them made in Malaysia, in JB, right? And somehow they are then brought into Singapore, right? And they are then sold and distributed. Very early in the morning, he told me, distributed to all the food court in Singapore, and then they're sold over there. So he make a margin out of this, right? So and this guy was actually working full time another job one. Okay, he's not even full time running this business, right? But this is a very clear example of something that's manufactured in Malaysia and sold in Singapore, right? And he had a very healthy side income from this, right? So the other way that typically most of you guys don't realize is, things that like, your interior design. If you're doing ID in Singapore, right? I don't know when you do your renovation for your flat, for your condo. I'm not sure how many of you guys know, but actually a lot of materials actually come from Malaysia, be it tiles, electrical items such as fans or lights, right? And furniture. I don't know how many of you have actually been to JB and realize that a lot of the furniture or tiles or electrical items actually come from Malaysia, right? Actually, I've been to lighting shops in JB, right? And the guy buying the item next to me is actually a Singaporean ID. Okay, he's from Singapore, right? They are interior design company. They buy stuff and then they bring over to Singapore to install. Okay, so many items. So they're not even made in JB for they're just sold in JB, right? And then they brought across to Singapore to sell again, right? So this is another example, right? So I think the most obvious is lighting, fans, furniture, curtains. Okay, in case you guys didn't know, a lot of curtains are actually made in Johor. I know this for a fact, right? And then the guy in Singapore, he actually only do the measurements, right? And he do the sales, right? He do the material selection, right? But actually all are made in JB and then brought over to Singapore and then installation, of course, by the same guy lah. So the guy who actually sold the curtain is actually in Johor one. Okay, so these are examples of manufacture in JB, sell in Singapore, right? Because some of you guys may be interested to run a business, either as a side business, right? And you're wondering now, you're watching my channel, is there a way to tap on this improving Singapore and JB relations, right? A lot of people do it like for example, Old Chunky. In case you guys didn't know, Old Chunky, right? The curry puffs and the fish balls, all that, right? A lot of it, they actually have a factory in Johor, so they make stuff in Johor and sell in Singapore, right? They have a centralized kitchen in JB actually. Coca-Cola, right, also does the same thing. All Coca-Cola in Singapore is actually bottled in JB, right, and sold in Singapore, right? So Singapore Coca-Cola, there's actually no bottling plant in Singapore, not anymore, lah, right? They used to be in Tuas, which has moved over to JB, right? So and like for example, all BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes, all spare parts are actually the central distribution centers actually in Johor Bahru. So these are examples of make in Johor, made in JB, manufactured in JB, sold in Singapore, right? So your costs are in ringgit, right? And you sell in Singapore dollars. Some of you may argue that you're actually doing it today, right? You guys make stuff in China, right? And then from China you sell over Shopee or Taobao or TikTok in Singapore, right? That you can also do that. There's no harm in that. So it's actually a similar model, but just in the difference here is that these items are made in Malaysia, because not, I guess China can't really produce everything, especially like food stuff. You cannot really expect certain all food stuff to be made in China. So there are some things you should make in Malaysia, which are still cheaper. There's still a margin to be made, and it's more logical to produce in Malaysia because of the close proximity. Method number two is to employ in Malaysia, to employ the staff in Malaysia and provide the service in Singapore. So this is example, I give you an example, right? I know a friend, right? He actually runs an education, online education software business. So he makes online education software. So like, children when they go to school, right? They go to or they go to tuition, right? There's some online software where they click the click and then they learn, they go through classes online. So this guy, he produces this content, right, and he produces them in fact also for the Singapore government, right, so for MOE and the schools, right, Ministry of Education, and his IT guys, right, some of them sit in Singapore, some of them sit actually in Malaysia, right. He used to, like, they come to work in Singapore, then he was thinking about it, why do these guys need to come to work in Singapore, right? They can actually work in JB. So he actually set up an office in JB, right, put all his staff there, right, and they start producing the ID work, right, in JB. So this is a very good example, right, a product or service that you don't need to actually physically be in Singapore, right. For example, this typically applies to IT, information technology stuff, back end of IT, right, even call centers, right. You will notice a lot of banks in Singapore no longer have call center in Singapore, right. Their call centers are overseas, some of it in Malaysia, Philippines, India, China, right. So this is one example. Of course, these are banks like UOB. Recently, UOB Singapore recently announced that they're going to move a number of back-end stuff to Malaysia, right? Actually, specifically to KL, right? I know for a fact, like some companies, they don't necessarily have to do their stuff in Singapore. Like I know some law firms in Singapore, legal firms, right? A lot of their back-end paperwork is not actually done in Singapore. They actually sub it out to staff, right, in JB, because these things can be taught, like finance, payroll, right, accounting, payments, right. Do you really need that finance staff to sit in Singapore, right? You can actually train someone overseas to do this work. So but the service is still provided for a Singapore company. So in that sense, a lot of these jobs can be then outsourced to someone in JB to do, but again the service is provided for a Singapore company, right? So that's another way to make money, right? And not only big companies are doing this, small companies as well. I know a lot of company secretaries, right? There's a reason why co-working spaces in Johor Bahru are doing very well right now, because a lot of companies decide that, hey, I can actually employ one or two Malaysian to do this job for me in JB, right? I don't really need to employ someone in Singapore for this purpose, right? So this is method number two to make money. So if you have a service to provide in Singapore where the work can actually be done from home or from another third party location, right, you can actually do this method in Johor Bahru. And in Johor Bahru, one thing good, it's easier for you to monitor, right? You can some of you may say long distance stuff, one thing you cannot monitor, but JB at least you can still go and monitor if you have to, at least on a semi-regular basis. Third way to make money is actually provide a service in Malaysia, a business in Malaysia for Singapore-based clients. This is something like what I do. So I mean, the business is in Malaysia, right? The business is no longer in Singapore, right? Unlike the first two examples, the sales is done in Malaysia, but the clientele, we're actually targeting a Singapore clientele. As you know, today, many Singaporeans are going to JB, right? Either for shopping, for cheaper living costs, for retirement, for anything. I mean, there's lots of reasons why Singaporeans are going to JB today. So we know there are a lot of Singaporeans in JB spending money there. So you target this crowd, right? So you're not exactly, like Malaysia, right? Malaysia is still technically a third world country, not as sophisticated as Singapore, doesn't have as much capital. So you come from Singapore, you bring Singapore dollar capital, you bring Singapore sophistication, right? You bring some ideas, what Singaporeans would want in JB. I hear this all the time. Singaporeans go to JB, say, oh, Malaysia doesn't have this, or Malaysia doesn't have that, Malaysia too dirty, or whatever, right? Malaysia don't, of course, some things in Malaysia are good, but you can bring some Singapore aspects, right, or retail aspects into JB and market to Singaporeans. It's exactly, it's just something like what I do. Like, for example, I'm a Malaysian, but I'm a Singapore PR, right? So I know Singapore and JB fairly well. So how I got into this business, I sell real estate because I know what are the wants, the needs of a Singapore buyer. But of course, my product is a Malaysian product, right? So this is an example, right? You can, Singaporean can go to JB, open cafe, for example. I don't know, that target Singaporean cafe preferences, right? Because in Singapore, open cafe is very expensive, right? Maybe financially more difficult to achieve. But in JB, the maths could be a lot better, right? So you provide a service again, as I mentioned, targeting Singapore clients in Malaysia, right? Since you know there are a lot of Singaporeans going to JB today. So thank you very much. I hope that was useful. The three ways, right, to make money, right? Think about it. I mean, if you guys have an entrepreneurial streak in you, right, you have this itch to do business one day. Think about it, right? Sometimes the idea can be born out of these three concepts that I mentioned above, right? Depending on what your personal skill set or talent is, right? So I hope you enjoyed this video today and that was useful. If you do like my content, do like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I hope to see you guys soon here, and I'll get more content and have more fun. If you have any comments or ideas or criticisms, please feel free to leave a comment on my YouTube channel below. Thank you very much, and bye bye.